Most men spend years trying to say the right things, believing that attraction is built through the perfect words delivered at the perfect time. They learn lines, practice confidence, and follow advice that tells them to be more charming, more interesting, more impressive, and yet, despite all that effort, something still doesn't land. The moment slips. The connection never quite forms the way they expected. The truth is, it's not a failure of effort, it's a gap in understanding. Because attraction, real attraction, isn't built on what sounds good, it's built on what feels real. And most men are never taught how to communicate in a way that actually reaches someone on that deeper level. They're given surface level rules for a process that is anything but surface level. What's missing is simple but powerful, knowing how to make someone feel seen and understood without trying to impress them. There are certain moments in conversation where the energy shifts, where someone is just about to open up or just revealed something real. Most men don't recognize these moments, and even when they do, they don't know what to say. But there are two simple phrases that change everything, not because they're clever, but because they connect. And once you understand why they work, you'll start to see every interaction differently. Most men aren't failing because they don't try. In fact, many are doing exactly what they've been told to do. Be confident, give compliments, show interest, but don't come across as too eager. On the surface, it sounds like solid advice, but in real conversations, it often creates something that feels rehearsed, controlled, and slightly disconnected. That's where the problem begins. Because while these strategies focus on what to say, they completely ignore how it's being experienced. And that's the part that actually matters. You can say all the right things and still feel like the conversation isn't going anywhere. You might notice she responds politely, maybe even positively, but there's no real shift, no depth, no sense of emotional pull. It feels like you're talking at each other, not actually connecting. The reason is simple. Most conversations stay on the surface. They revolve around facts, stories, and safe topics. What you do, where you've been, what you like. There's nothing wrong with that, but it rarely creates something meaningful on its own. Real connection happens beneath that layer, in the subtle emotional cues that often go unnoticed. And here's the key. Most men were never taught to recognize or respond to those cues, so they miss the moments that matter, the slight change in tone, the pause before she says something real, the shift in energy when the conversation becomes more personal. It's not that the opportunity isn't there, it's that they don't know how to step into it. And without that understanding, even the best words fall flat. To understand why some conversations create instant connection while others go nowhere, you have to look beneath the words themselves. Because what truly drives attraction isn't logic, and it isn't performance, it's emotional experience. At the core of that experience is one simple factor: emotional safety. When a woman feels emotionally safe, something shifts internally. She becomes more open, more relaxed, more present. She stops filtering every word and starts expressing herself more naturally. That's when real connection begins to form, not when she's being impressed, but when she feels comfortable enough to be real. Most people assume attraction is built by saying impressive or exciting things. But in reality, the brain responds much more strongly to the feeling of being understood. It's not about how clever or confident you sound. It's about whether the other person feels like they can be themselves around you without pressure or judgment. And this is where most conversations fall short. They create subtle tension, the need to respond the right way, the need to explain, justify, or maintain a certain image. Even if it's not obvious, that pressure is felt, and when it's there, emotional openness shuts down. But when that pressure is removed, when someone feels seen without being analyzed and accepted without being questioned, something deeper takes its place. Trust begins to form, naturally and without force. That's the foundation these two phrases tap into. They don't try to impress, they don't try to lead the conversation somewhere. Instead, they do something far more powerful. They create an environment where the other person can simply relax and be understood, and that's what makes them work. The first phrase is simple, but it carries a depth most people overlook. I noticed that about you. At first glance, it doesn't sound impressive. It's not a compliment in the traditional sense. It doesn't try to charm or persuade, but that's exactly why it works. Most compliments are broad and predictable. You're beautiful. You're smart. You're interesting. While these can be appreciated, they often feel general, like something that could be said to anyone. They don't create a strong emotional impact because they lack specificity. This phrase does the opposite. Instead of giving a conclusion, it points to an observation. And that distinction matters, because when you notice something specific about someone, you're showing that you're paying attention in a way most people don't. For example, instead of saying, "You're passionate," you might say, "I noticed how your energy shifts when you talk about something you really care about." That lands differently. It tells her that you're not just listening to respond, you're actually observing and understanding. And that creates a powerful internal reaction. She feels seen. And being seen, truly seen, is one of the deepest human needs there is. This doesn't mean you need to analyze everything she does or search for something clever to say. In fact, the more natural it is, the stronger it lands. The key is to simply pay attention to small, genuine details. The way she lights up when talking about a memory. The way she pauses before saying something meaningful. The way her tone changes when something matters to her. When you reflect one of these observations back to her, it creates a moment of stillness. Not because the words are complicated, but because they're real. And that's where connection begins. But there's an important boundary here. This phrase only works when it's genuine. If it feels forced, exaggerated, or used as a tactic, it loses its impact completely. People can sense when something isn't authentic. So the goal isn't to use the phrase, it's to develop the awareness behind it. Because once you start truly noticing people, you won't need to think about what to say. The right words will come naturally, and when they do, they'll land in a way most words never do. Most meaningful moments in conversation don't disappear because nothing happened. They disappear because something did happen, and no one acknowledged it. There's often a brief window where the energy shifts. She says something a little more personal. Her tone softens. There's a pause that carries more weight than the words themselves. In that moment, something real is present. And this is where many men hesitate, not because they don't feel it, but because they don't know what to do with it. They second guess themselves. They wonder if saying something might make things awkward, so they play it safe. They nod, smile, and move the conversation forward as if nothing just changed. But that moment was the opportunity. Silence in those situations isn't always neutral. Sometimes it communicates disinterest or lack of awareness, even when that's not the intention. The connection doesn't deepen, and the conversation returns to the surface. What's important to understand is this: if you felt something shift, there's a high chance she felt it too. That feeling is your signal. It doesn't require a perfect response. It doesn't require something clever or impressive. It just requires acknowledgement, something simple and real that shows you were present enough to notice. Because when those moments are recognized, they open the door to something deeper. And when they're missed, that door quietly closes. Learning to trust those moments and respond to them is what separates surface conversation from genuine connection. The second phrase is even more powerful because it addresses something deeper than attention. It addresses pressure. You don't have to explain that to me. Most people don't realize how often others feel the need to justify themselves in conversation. Whether it's a decision, an emotion, or a personal story, there's usually an underlying expectation to make it make sense, to explain it clearly, to be understood in a logical way. And over time, that creates a subtle kind of tension. Even in casual conversations, people are used to being questioned. Why did you do that? What made you feel that way? Are you sure that was the right choice? These questions aren't always negative, but they do create pressure. They shift the conversation into explanation mode, where the person feels the need to defend or clarify themselves. This phrase removes that pressure instantly. When you say, "You don't have to explain that to me," you're communicating something rare. "I'm not here to analyze you. I'm here to understand you." That distinction changes everything. It allows her to relax, both emotionally and mentally. Instead of searching for the right way to explain herself, she can simply exist in what she's feeling. There's no need to organize her thoughts into something perfectly logical. There's no need to justify her choices. And that creates a sense of ease that stands out. For example, imagine she's telling you about a decision that didn't make sense on paper, leaving a job, ending a relationship, or following something she couldn't fully explain. As she speaks, there's often a slight hesitation, as if she's preparing to defend her reasoning. Instead of questioning it, you say calmly, "You don't have to explain that to me." That moment lands differently, not because you agreed with everything she said, but because you removed the expectation for her to prove anything. You gave her space to be understood without conditions. And that's where trust begins to deepen. It's important to understand that this isn't about avoiding meaningful conversation or shutting down dialogue. It's about recognizing when someone doesn't need to be questioned, they need to be accepted. When used sincerely, this phrase creates a sense of relief that most people rarely experience. And over time, that feeling becomes associated with you, not because of what you said, but because of how you made them feel. Now that you understand the two phrases, it's important to see what's happening beneath the surface when you use them. People don't remember conversations the way they remember feelings. Long after the exact words are forgotten, the emotional experience remains. How someone felt in your presence becomes the lasting impression you leave behind. This is where emotional anchoring comes in. When a person consistently feels a certain way around you, calm, understood, accepted, their mind begins to associate you with that feeling. It's not something they consciously decide. It happens naturally over time, through repeated emotional experiences. So when you create moments where she feels seen through your awareness and relaxed through your acceptance, those feelings begin to connect back to you. Being around you starts to feel easy, comfortable, different from the usual interactions that carry subtle pressure or expectation, and that difference stands out. It's not about saying more or doing more, it's about how your presence is experienced. When someone doesn't feel the need to perform, explain, or protect themselves around you, they begin to lower their guard without even thinking about it. That's when conversations become more open, more natural, more real. And without trying to force anything, you become someone they want to spend more time with, not because you impress them, but because being around you feels good in a way they can't easily explain. Individually, each phrase creates a specific emotional shift. But when you understand how they work together, you see the real structure behind connection. The first phrase, "I noticed that about you," creates awareness. It shows attention. It signals that you are not just hearing words, you are observing meaning. It makes a person feel seen in a way that feels personal and genuine, not generic or automatic. The second phrase, "You don't have to explain that to me," creates relief. It removes pressure. It takes away the need to justify, defend, or organize emotions into something logical. It communicates acceptance without conditions. One builds recognition, the other builds safety. And when those two experiences combine, something deeper emerges: trust. Because trust isn't created through intensity or effort. It's created when someone feels both understood and accepted at the same time. That combination is rare in everyday interactions, which is why it feels so powerful when it happens naturally. Most conversations stay in one of two extremes. Either they are polite but surface level, or they become overly analytical and questioning. Very few interactions create both awareness and ease in the same space, but when they do, the emotional effect is noticeable. The conversation feels slower, more present, more grounded. There is less tension and more openness. That's why these two phrases are not just individual tools. They form a simple emotional structure. One helps her feel recognized, the other helps her feel safe. Together, they create the foundation where real connection can naturally grow without force or performance. The real power of these phrases doesn't come from memorizing them. It comes from using them at the right moment, in the right way, with the right energy. First, timing matters more than wording. These phrases should never feel pre-planned or forced into a conversation. They only work when they naturally fit what is already happening. That means you need to actually listen, observe, and stay present instead of thinking about what to say next. Second, your tone is everything. Both phrases should be said in a calm, grounded, and relaxed way. Not dramatic, Not overly emotional, just simple and sincere. If there is any sense of performance behind them, the impact drops immediately. Third, don't overuse them. These are not lines to repeat. They are responses to specific emotional moments. If you try to apply them too often, they lose meaning and feel artificial. The goal is not to rely on phrases, it's to develop awareness. Once you start noticing small emotional shifts in conversation, you'll naturally know when something meaningful is happening, and when that happens, you won't need to think too much. The right response will feel obvious in the moment. That's when these phrases become powerful, not as scripts, but as natural expressions of presence. Even though these phrases are simple, most people weaken their impact by using them the wrong way. The first mistake is turning them into a technique. The moment you treat them like a formula to get a reaction, they stop feeling real. People can sense when something is calculated, even if they can't explain why. The second mistake is forcing them into the wrong moment. Not every conversation carries emotional depth, and trying to upgrade a normal moment can feel unnatural. These phrases only work when there is already something genuine happening in the interaction. The third mistake is overusing them. If every conversation contains special lines, they lose their meaning. What makes them powerful is their rarity and sincerity. Another common issue is expecting immediate results. These are not shortcuts or tricks. They don't create instant outcomes. They build gradual emotional impressions over time. When used correctly, they feel invisible. When used incorrectly, they feel obvious. The difference is always authenticity.